Okay, now it's time to cue the scary music because we're going to talk about Windows Vista. Windows Vista was released in January 2007. Vista was a substantial redesign and a re-architecting of the Windows operating system. Now, it's inevitable that over time, the operating system begins to kind of run counterintuitive to the way we're actually using PCs. And we're talking about things like how programs are built, how they're operating. We're looking for more efficiencies on how memory is managed, all sorts of things. And quite frankly, the Windows operating system had a legacy and a history of being built on DOS. Security continued to become an ever important item just like it is today. And at some point, you just have to do a lot of redesigning on the operating systems, and that is exactly what Microsoft did with Vista. However, they almost bit off more than they could chew and made too many changes, didn't get all the bugs worked out, and this created some significant challenges for users. Vista was not well received by the marketplace. You would load Vista, and immediately something would break, something wouldn't work, some application wouldn't work. It was just one thing after another, after another, after another. Vista had a reputation early on of being buggy and difficult, and it certainly was. Now, what's bad about this is Windows Vista was introducing a lot of incredible new ways of doing things in the Windows operating system. It was a good idea. It was just, quite frankly, poorly implemented. For example, we got our first edition of the UAC, the user account control functionality. We'll talk about that later in the course. And many corporate environments, as a result of looking at Vista and trying it out on a few workstations, simply ignored Vista. They decided they would stick with Windows XP and they would just wait for whatever came after Vista and hope that it was better than what Vista was offering. Now, Vista was released as 5 different targeted versions. So we saw an expansion of the idea with XP of 3 versions. Vista came out and was offered in Vista Home Basic, Vista Home Premium, Vista Business, Vista Ultimate, and Vista Enterprise. Now let's take a real quick look at each one of these. Vista Home Basic was targeted to the home small office user. This really is the equivalent of XP Home Edition. And if you're not watching these in order, I'm going to compare each one of these editions to the previous. So if you haven't seen the video entitled Windows XP, you might want to go watch that. So Vista Home Basic kind of maps to the XP Home Edition, but then Vista Home Premium had all the features of Home Basic, but it included an upgraded Windows Media Center. So Microsoft was still toying with this idea of building the Media Center functionality for organizing and managing photos, audio, and then, of course, the whole idea of recording video on the computer and keeping it and recording TV shows and watching it and managing it. All that was still out there in Vista. Then Vista Business was the Vista equivalent of XP Professional. This offered file sharing functionalities, a lot more security and access controls. And then Vista Ultimate combined all the features of all the other Vista editions. Vista Ultimate gave you basically everything Vista would do. One of the things that was a big deal when Vista first came out was this whole idea of this Aero look, A-E-R-O, and things were slightly transparent. You could tab through open windows in this really cool flying, floating interface, and that's what most people wanted to see Vista for until they kind of introduced some of the weaknesses of Vista, and that novelty wore off pretty quickly. Now, Vista Ultimate also added a game performance tweaker and the ability to rip DVDs. Now, Vista Enterprise, you'll hear a lot on these various operating systems about enterprise editions. Vista Enterprise, just like the others, is designed for use in corporate enterprise environments, meaning large installations where you have a lot of these being used as client workstations that connect to Windows Active Directory domains built using Windows servers. And you'll see things like BitLocker drive encryption, and it'll support 2 CPUs and all that sort of stuff. However, Enterprise Edition can only be purchased directly from Microsoft because it is part of what Microsoft sells as volume licensing product. You pay a little bit less, you have volume licensing, which means you can use a lot more licenses but you have to purchase those licenses and these editions from Microsoft. And when you buy one of these, generally you don't have to put a product key in when you install it. All versions of Vista are or were, however you want to look at that, available as either 32 or 64-bit versions. And we're going to talk about 32 and 64-bit a little more later on in the course. So that's kind of the lowdown on Windows Vista.